are people in the US administration and in the United States who feel that the world cannot be just seen from the point of view of what President Trump is articulating.
President Trump have crossed all the limits of being a diplomat. He is non-diplomat president. He is a social media activist. He is more into non-traditional media type or North American backdoor diplomacy, where we never heard about the big power like Mr. Shashank will agree when he was a foreign secretary. We didn't have revealed much of the talk by backdoor state diplomacy.
All right, let's decode and dissect these complex geopolitical issues with our panel of experts. Joining me on India Connect tonight is Ambassador Shashank. He's former Foreign Secretary of India. Also joining me on the show is Dr. Wael Awad. He's a senior international journalist, president of the Foreign Correspondents Club South Asia and distinguished fellow at the Tilotama Foundation. Very warm welcome to both of you. Ambassador Shashank, let me begin with you. What do you make of all the speculation and debate that we've seen in recent days, especially on social media, over Prime Minister Modi's decision to skip first the Gaza Peace Summit and then the ASEAN Summit, even though he addressed the latter virtually? Many are linking it to Trump's presence at these events and the fact that these events have come at a time of very frosty India-US ties. How do you look at it, sir?
Well, there's some truth in it, what you are saying. At the same time, the Gaza summit was a kind of a last-minute invitation and a decision to hold the summit. And therefore, it cannot be compared with the long-term preparations which have gone in for the ASEAN summits, ASEAN's interactions with the other world leaders during the ASEAN summit. But the point remains that, yes, the whole world relationships have gone through a very wide change. This no longer just a simple question of the rule-bound Indo-Pacific region, rule-bound international regimes. It's a question of the United States now coming to a situation where they feel that many other countries are rising and leading to a relative decline of the US power projection in the world. And therefore, now they have to find out who are their friends, who are their adversaries. And in fact, many of their old friends are also turning into adversaries as regards several areas like trade, tariffs, and and even the funding for military budgets are concerned. So I think there are these various changes which seems that the whole world has now come into a different position. And now when we hear Prime Minister Modi reiterating that this is 21st century is India and ASEAN century, which means that he is also very strongly carrying out this policy that India and G20 and ASEAN, they have to rise, and there is just no way that their progress can be halted or can be reversed. So I think seems to be a kind of without attending the summit in Malaysia, it seems to be some kind of a reiteration of the Indian position that there needs to be an open, rule-bound relationship in the world, which will be good for everyone. And India and ASEAN are going to contribute to that world relationship, irrespective of the fears that the Americans may be having. And it's not just all Americans, because you know that the Secretary of State has just talked about the importance of the India-US relationship, which means that there are people in the US administration and in the United States who feel that the world cannot be just seen from the point of view of what President Trump is articulating. Maybe he's articulating the views of a certain group of people, but not the entire United States administration or the US administration, or let's say US people. I think therefore these are the things, but I would also like to listen to my colleague Dr. Awad, who is a very senior observer of the international relations, and get to know what he thinks about the whole thing.
Absolutely. We'd all want to know what he thinks. Dr. Awad, what do you make of Prime Minister Modi's presence from these, absence, I beg your pardon, from these recent summits, especially the ASEAN summit and all the speculation around it? Would you agree with those who say that because President Trump is known to be a loose cannon, who's publicly embarrassed many world leaders, ambushed them into very undesirable situations, therefore, there is a strong case for the Indian Prime Minister to avoid running into Donald Trump at a time when India-US ties are obviously under strain.
Thank you for having me, and thank you, Ambassador Shashank, whom I have a great respect for him as a foreign secretary and as a career diplomat. And I fully agree with whatever point he have raised in this issue. I would like to add 2, 3 points here. Actually, what happened to the two presidents, the two leaders, I mean, the Prime Minister and President Trump in his first tenure, they had a very good relation, and it was just very too close that nobody could avoid. But I think the geopolitical changes, yes, have taken very sharp changes and very fast track it has been on for some time. So President Trump, as well as the Prime Minister Modi, having a domestic compulsion to meet. So there is a regional reason, and there are domestic reason, and there are international reason for avoiding meeting with him, because President Trump have crossed all the limit of being a diplomat. He is non-diplomat president. He is a social media activist. He is more into non-traditional media type or North American backdoor diplomacy, where we never heard about the big power, like Mr. Shashank will agree, when he was a foreign secretary, we didn't have revealed much of the talk backdoor stage diplomacy. So therefore, now to find a president who's openly saying things which is the American administration feel embarrassed because they always have that ambiguity of saying something and doing something else. So the Prime Minister of India, having regionally domestic issues here, he need to address his own audience in two major issues. One is that India never accepted a third party mediation for any war with Pakistan, especially whenever India have been telling the whole world, and we've been reporting that it is a bilateral issue between India and Pakistan under Shimla Agreement. With the new government in power since 2014, India made it one-way track. There is not even willing to talk to Pakistan, but they say Jammu and Kashmir is an integral part of India, including the Pakistani side and also the Chinese, what they have taken. So I think this is a very important point, that he will not be embarrassed in an international audience where he can be internationally tarnish the image of the Prime Minister. Secondly, domestically, you're having election also in India. You cannot also succumb to the pressure under the trade, bilateral trade, where America, as Piyush, Minister of Commerce, said, we cannot negotiate with you with the gun in our head. So there has to be some sort of a reconciliation, some sort of a ground that the Prime Minister wanted to reach. First, let the election in Bihar finish. Second, let the commerce delegation from both sides reach to sort of an agreement. Third, he is willing to meet with him. But now, with the G20 Prime Minister willing to join in South Africa, President Trump is not going to that. So I think there is a cool period, but that it will not be strategically parting away, because Trump is also interim. President for one tenure, and after that, then it has to come to the normal track. President Trump did not have a friend. He had all enemies, actually. Even among the friends of the United States are feeling so embarrassed with his behavior. So Prime Minister is naturally, he does not want to have an audience with the president who have his own way of putting the things, and he's calling it the Trump doctrine.
The Trump doctrine, which sounds very dangerous and devious at multiple levels. And, while I can tell you, Dr. Awad, that so many of us around the world are waiting with bated breath for this term presidency to come to an end. But if we're hoping and, with any amount of certainty that we will see the back of him 3 years from now, I'm not sure if there's any guarantee, because his close aides are already talking about a third term for President Trump. Make of it what you will. Of course, the US Constitution doesn't allow it, but then this is Donald Trump we're talking about. On a more serious note, Ambassador Shashank, of course, Dr. Awad makes some very good points. For the 100th time at the end of the ASEAN summit, aboard Air Force One, Trump reiterated his claim that he had brokered the ceasefire between India and Pakistan in the month of May. And once again, he said, India is cutting back on its purchases of Russian oil, despite the fact that India has repeatedly denied his first claim and not confirmed his second claim at any point in time. You may recall, sir, that a few months ago, after the G7 summit in Canada, Donald Trump had impromptu decided to invite Prime Minister Modi to the White House. And many today believe in hindsight that Prime Minister Modi was very wise in turning down that invitation, because later it turned out that Trump was hosting Asim Munir, the Pakistan Army chief, at the White House, and clearly his intent was to ambush Prime Minister Modi into some sort of a photo op with Asim Munir, something that would never be acceptable to India. Taking all this into account, is there a strong case, would you say, for Prime Minister Modi to really avoid Donald Trump at this point in time?
I think your question has the answer also hidden in it. That is, this is not just a question of India-US relationship. There is a third party to it, and that is Asim Munir, who rules Pakistan directly or indirectly. And right from 1947 onwards, we have seen that whenever there is a possibility, an opening available to Pakistan to get the attention of the United States in any way by offering anything possible to the US and later on to China also, they would do it. Not for themselves alone, but also to somehow push the Indians also in doing exactly the same thing and saying that, well, we are all children of the same old India, and so we should behave in exactly the same manner with the other countries, which is very unlikely, because I don't think Asim Munir or the people in Pakistan, they just got a territory because they were the favorite children of the old colonial rulers and the new world power, that's the United States. And therefore, they have been playing this game always. And once again, when they lost the plot during the Operation Sindoor and lost many of their air bases, many assets of the Pakistan army, I think they were really very embarrassed domestically. But there are two factors. One is that they can play upon the personal predilections of President Trump and his family to make money and to become the largest American business empire ever. So that's the legacy that President Trump would like to leave, and Pakistan would like to build into that to the extent is possible by selling off all their assets to America. But the other point also is that there is an AI tool available whereby India's victory in Operation Sindoor can be converted into India's defeat, and to convince the President Trump that there was going to be a nuclear conflict between India and Pakistan, which would have led millions of deaths, not only in South Asia, but all over the world gradually. And therefore, President Trump, who calls himself a peace Nick, who wants to bring about peace in all regions of the world, therefore, he feels that, well, he has stopped a nuclear conflict in South Asia. Third point, I would say that there is a very old theory of fault lines, which are created by this Harvard professor, to say that, well, there are countries like India, Turkey, and many others who are on the fault lines. And therefore, every world power would try to build their assets in these fault line countries. And that is the process which I think the Americans feel that in India now is the time to build those assets and to make sure that those fault lines are given further possibility to divide the public opinion and the power of India, so that it does not rise to the extent, because India does not rise only as a power like China or Russia. India rises in the minds of the people. There are many people in America and all over the world who would like to learn from India's yoga, Ayurveda, India's philosophy of the whole world being a family for well-meaning people. So I think these are things. And the final point, I would say that there is a conflict going on in Europe. And previously, First World War and Second World War, they were both in Europe. So there is always this overhang of the Third World War in Europe, between Ukraine and Russia. So I think till that conflict ends, I think India is being made the number one country which should be put under pressure to bring peace to that region. If you remember, First World War and Second World War, India lost about 80, 90,000 soldiers in both conflicts. And therefore, India is a very important swing state even for this potential third world power, which we may not realize, but I think other countries realize it. So we have to keep in mind
Okay.
that India has a role to play and we have responsibility for world peace on our side.
Okay. Okay, Dr. Awad, let me come back to you. Of course, it is very clear that Donald Trump's growing closeness to Pakistan is driven by his vested interests. And it really doesn't help for Marco Rubio to say that the US is going to expand its relationship with Pakistan, but not at the cost of India, when we see, Trump either hosting Asim Munir and Shehbaz Sharif for lunch at the White House every few months, or calling them great leaders. But I have a slightly different question for you. Uh, you know, after having dealt some body blows to the India-US relationship in recent months, do you believe that Donald Trump is now inflicting damage on India's relationship with some of the other countries, given that Prime Minister Modi has had to stay away from the Gaza summit and the ASEAN summit?
Absolutely. I would say that it was vindicated for not going to Sharm el-Sheikh because it turned to be a comic of kind of, a stage where
Yes.
people were laughing, laughable. Even the president of Egypt, Sisi, was not standing with him, though it was the host country. And I think that is okay. But if I want to take the summit in Kuala Lumpur, ASEAN, I think it is unwise, if my own personal opinion here, that India knows that Kuala Lumpur is very important, especially the ASEAN summit held there. It's very important for Prime Minister to be present at the international stage because Trump is nothing but just like I guess like the Prime Minister. This is one of the issue, but I think the other issue also, forget about Pakistan. I think Pakistan, if they trust the United States so much, I think they are going into the down. They will fall very fast because the United States, even the defense minister of Pakistan said they hired Pakistan for 30 years during the jihad in Afghanistan. So therefore, I don't want to speak much about Pakistan issues in this. I think the prime minister stand a very strong stick wicket, and he understands the compulsion of re-engaging or resetting the American India track. But I think what the Americans are using here, Niha, is very strange and very strong. America does not have any more the carrots. The president of the United States carried the stick in both hands. You do this or you are our enemy. You cannot even jeopardize India's strategic foreign policy sovereignty, because here you are also interfering in the national interest of India. When it comes in terms of Russia, for example, you have a Russian oil where the American wanted you to cut the Russian oil. They wanted you to cut strategic relation, which has been built over the years and in fact over decades. And Russia have inherited the legacy of the USSR good relation with India. So how can you, just because you don't like Putin with the war on Ukraine, impose in India this much of sanctions and trying to bring India by saying that I'm giving you also strategic weapon, you should be in our camp? I don't think the Indian Prime Minister or any Indian leader will take the American trusted to that much that they can change their position or take any side of any alliances. And I agree with the Ambassador Shashank. India lost enough people, even they were not part of the First or Second World War, but the Indian soldiers served with their blood to at least end these wars, and they have survived and sacrificed enough. I don't think the American president is willing to have more of a stable world. He is more of creating more instability. He wanted to sell American weapons. He have a domestic compulsion. He's speaking of America first. He wanted to sell weapons. So you search for more new areas where you will have, more fighting, more war zones. He doesn't talk. He is speaking only of wars and speaking of a trade war. How can you wanted to address? Tomorrow he will meet with Xi Jinping. He will enjoy his relation. He will go back to the United States with his audience, that he will increase his popularity there. If the Prime Minister of India goes and he put all this and in his basket, how would the Prime Minister, who is projected in India as the strongest Indian Prime Minister and the strongest government of India, how can he address his audience here? I think these are the issues American. This is only because President Trump lack history, lack reading of history. He doesn't read anything. He thinks he is only a man of deal, and he himself said it. So you don't have a deal here. We have a policy which is based on a systematic democratic system. You cannot fight us in your own terms, and you bring us and dictate us what you want. I think I feel Indian position is vindicated. However, in international arena, I think India has to be present, irrespective whether President Trump there or not there.
That's an interesting point. You've taken a very nuanced position all this. Ambassador Shashank, I'll give you the last word. Dr. Awad says that while I understand why the Indian Prime Minister would want to avoid any embarrassing situation with Trump, and we know how unpredictable that man can be, a loose cannon really in many situations, but at the same time, India needs to be present at important global fora. Therefore, I'm going to ask you this. Do you believe that Donald Trump is hurting not just India-US ties, but actually India's ties with many other countries? You know, we talk, for instance, so much about India's Act East policy, and therefore Prime Minister Modi's absence from ASEAN has raised a few eyebrows. At the end of the day, does this affect India's global standing, you think?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the president would like India to follow its line, because they say that India wants to be good friends with the Americans. So therefore, now is the time for India to show that it is friend of America and no one else. And that is not acceptable to India, because India has invested so much in friendship with other countries in Asia, Africa, and elsewhere, that they have been calling themselves civilizational partners. They have been calling them about the culture, about the people-to-people relations which they want to build. And whenever there is any emergency of any kind, India has been the number one country to move forward, show its friendship with them. They can't abandon everything of that and then say simply that, okay, we will now behave like the one of the courtiers in the court of Emperor Trump. So that is somewhat difficult for any leader. I think Dr. Awad has put it very nicely, but he is a very senior journalist, so he knows how to put across his viewpoints. So I will only say that, well, for any prime minister in India, it would be difficult, and least of all for Prime Minister Modi. But I think the mistake was that we ourselves, after first Trump administration, decided that a second Trump administration would be even better for India. And so we gave up some of our old partnerships with Asia, Africa, and elsewhere, and moved closer towards setting up the trade and other strategic partnerships with the countries with whom we knew, at least in the Foreign Office, we knew that they're totally unreliable partner. They're all transactional relationships and only concentrating on how to project their own power. They're not willing to give up their power with reference to India's rise or the rise of any other collection of motley groups of countries as they think. But India will continue its march. India will continue to build friendships with countries in Asia, Africa, and elsewhere. And I'm quite sure that ultimately we will succeed in bringing about more peace to our region and to the world.
Quite right, sir. I think we can all agree that even though we've known from the beginning that Donald Trump can be a very difficult man, I don't think anybody saw the disaster of Trump 2.0 coming. I mean, this really has been a vastly different presidency from Trump 1.0. Let's see what the next 3 years bring. It is a scary thought, isn't it? But on that note, Ambassador Shashank and Dr. Wail Awad, always a pleasure talking to you. Thank you so much to both of you for joining me on India Connect.